Welcome back to the Common Historian podcast, where history meets mystery and the academics meet the unexplained. I'm Jeremy, and today we're exploring America's bloodiest conflicts through the lens of supernatural folklore, the ghostly legends born from the Civil War battlefields. Before we begin, a quick note about our approach. While the historical events we're discussing are thoroughly documented, the ghost stories that emerge from them often lack specific names and detailed accounts. To bring these legends to life, I've occasionally added fictional names and enhanced details while staying true to the spirit and patterns of the original folklore traditions. Picture this. It's dawn at Gettysburg, July 4th, 1863. The smoke is cleared from the 3 days of the most savage fighting America has ever seen, as the living tend to their wounded and bury their dead. Some claim they see figures in blue and gray still walking the battlefield, soldiers who don't know the battle is over. The Civil War claimed over 750,000 American lives between 1861 and 1865. Unlike the Revolutionary War, fought largely by small armies in rural areas, the Civil War brought unprecedented industrial scale slaughter to America's soil. Battles like Antietam saw 23,000 casualties in a single day. Gettysburg left 51,000 men dead, wounded, or missing across 3 July days. This scale of death is familiar place. Okay, this scale of death in familiar places. Pennsylvania farms, Virginia crossroads, Georgia fields create a perfect storm for supernatural folklore. Today, we'll examine the ghost stories that emerge from America's greatest trauma and what they reveal about how our nation processes civil war. Our journey begins in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, site of the war's most famous battle and its persistent hauntings. From July 1st to the 3rd, 1863, over 160,000 soldiers clashed across the rolling countryside around this small college town. When the guns fell silent, the fields were carpeted with bodies. The historical facts are staggering. On July 3rd alone, Pickett's charge saw 15,000 Confederate soldiers advance across a mile of open ground into concentrated Union fire. Only half made it back. The 1st Minnesota Infantry, ordered to buy time for Union reinforcements, suffered 82% casualty in 15 minutes. Entire regiments were wiped out in minutes. But the scale of death wasn't just in numbers, it was in the intimate horror of modern weapons used at close range. Rifled muskets, accurate at 500 feet, artillery loaded with canisters shot canister shot that turned cannons into giant shotguns. Medical knowledge that couldn't match the wounds inflicted by industrial war. According to local legend, the ghost sightings began almost immediately. Within weeks of the battle, Gettysburg residents reported seeing soldiers in both blue and gray uniforms walking the fields at dusk and dawn. These weren't vague shapes. Witnesses described specific details: torn uniforms, blood-stained bandages, the particular way Civil War soldiers carried their muskets. According to folklore tradition, farmer John Stevens was checking his fields in August 1863 when he encountered something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Local legend tells that as he approached the area where Pickett's charge had taken place, he saw them. Hundreds of Confederate soldiers in gray, advancing in perfect formation, crossed his wheat field. They moved like men in a trance. Folklore recounts neither hurried nor slow, but when in the steady pace of soldiers who had been ordered to take a position at any cost. Stevens could see their faces clearly in the morning light. Young men, mostly, but aged beyond their years by what they had seen and done. According to the legend, Stevens called out, thinking somehow living soldiers had returned to the field. But the gray ranks continued their advance, stepping over fences that no longer existed, moving towards an enemy that was no longer there. As they reached the wall where so many had fallen, they simply faded away like morning mist. The phantom charges at Gettysburg follow a pattern that would be repeated at battlefields across the country. They appear on significant dates, July anniversaries, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. They're most often seen at dusk or dawn when light plays tricks on the eyes, and they always follow the same routes used during the actual battle. But Gettysburg's ghosts aren't limited to Pickett's charge. Little Round Top, where the 20th Maine held the Union's left flank, has its own supernatural residence. According to folklore tradition, visitors regularly report seeing Union soldiers in blue positioned across among the rocks, their muskets aimed down the slopes as if the Confederate assaults were coming. Local legend tells of park ranger Sarah Miller conducting an evening tour in 1988 when she and her group spotted figures moving among the boulders. At first, they assumed it was a Civil War reenactment group, but as they watched, they realized these soldiers weren't following any script. They were reacting to something only they could see. According to folklore, the phantom soldiers of the 20th Maine maintained their position for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally raising their weapons as if to take aim at advancing enemies. Some appeared to be shouting orders, though no sound carried to the observers. Then, as darkness fell completely, they simply vanished. Modern Gettysburg receives over 1 million visitors annually, and the National Park Service maintains careful records of unusual incidents. Since 1970, they have documented over 1,500 reports of anomalous sightings. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across decades. Soldiers in period uniform, appearing solid and real until they vanished without warning. What's particularly striking is how these sightings cluster around historically accurate details. Phantom soldiers appear in the exact location where their units fought. They wear the correct uniforms for their regiments. They carry the right weapons for their time period. It is if the battle has somehow been permanently imprinted on the landscape. The most dramatic incident occurred on July 3rd, 1988, the 125th anniversary of Pickett's charge. According to folklore, over a dozen visitors independently reported seeing the same thing, a massive Confederate assault across the field, complete with battle flags, artillery smoke, and the sound of musket fire. The vision lasted approximately 15 minutes, the same duration as the original charge, before fading away. From Pennsylvania, we traveled south to Maryland and the Battle of Antietam, site of the single bloodiest day in American military history. September 17th, 1862, saw 23,000 casualties as Union and Confederate forces clashed over the Antietam Creek. The battle's outcome would influence whether European powers recognized Confederate independence. The fighting at Antietam was particularly savage because it occurred in such a confined area. Unlike the sprawling battles of Gettysburg, Antietam co- concentrated in its horror into specific killing grounds: the Dunkard Church, the cornfield, and most infamously, a a country lane that would forever be known as Bloody Lane. At Bloody Lane, Confederate soldiers had taken position in a sunken farm road, using it as a natural trench. When Union forces flanked the position, they were able to fire directly down into the road. In minutes, the lane was filled with Confederate dead, so many that photographers would later caption their images, "Confederate dead in the bloody lane." According to folklore tradition, the supernatural activity at Antietam began within months of the battle. Local farmers reported seeing soldiers in both blue and gray wandering their fields, apparently searching for something they could never find. Local legend tells of farmer Daniel Hoffenberger, whose land had been the center of the fighting. According to folklore, in December 1862, Poffenberger was walking through what had been the cornfield when he encountered a sight that defied explanation. The field was filled with soldiers in blue uniforms. According to local legend, they moved through the dead corn stalks like men looking for wounded comrades, calling out names in voices that seemed to come from a great distance. Some carried stretchers, others held lanterns that cast no light. All bore the wounds that had killed them. According to folklore tradition, Hoffenberger tried to approach them, thinking somehow wounded soldiers had been left behind. But as he drew closer, he could see they were not quite solid. He could glimpse the winter sky through their bodies. They took notice of him, continuing their eternal search for fallen friends who would never answer their calls. Bloody Lane itself became the focus of the most persistent supernatural activity. According to local legend, visitors regularly reported seeing Confederate soldiers lying in the sunken road, not as corpses, but as wounded men calling for help that never will come. Folklore tells of Civil War historian Margaret Chen visiting the battlefield in 1975. According to the legend, as she stood at the observation point overlooking Bloody Lane, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of men crying for water, calling for their mothers, begging for someone to end their suffering. When she looked down into the lane, folklore recounts that she could see them, dozens of Confederate soldiers in gray uniforms, laying there where they had fallen 113 years earlier. Some research reached towards her with outstretched hands. Others simply stared at the sky with the eyes that would never close. According to local legend, the vision lasted only a few minutes, but it left Chen shaken for years afterward. She later wrote, I finally understand that some wounds are too deep to heal, some suffering too profound to end with death." The ghost stories at Antium reveal a critical difference from Revolutionary War hauntings. These spirits aren't heroic guardians or protective presences. They're trapped souls, caught between life and death by the suddenness and brutality of their ends. This reflects the nature of the Civil War combat itself. Revolutionary War battles, while deadly, were smaller in scale and often allowed for the proper burial of dead. Civil War battles left thousands of bodies scattered across the farmland. many never properly identified or interred. The psychological impact was profound. Unlike foreign wars fought on distant soils, these battles occurred in America's backyard. Civilians had to live with the aftermath, fields that couldn't be fully cleared of bodies, wells contaminated with blood, crops that grew from soil fertilized by human remains. Our journey now takes us south to Georgia and the Battle of Chickamauga, where on September 19th and 20th, 1863, Confederate forces won one of their last major victories. The battle's name comes from a Cherokee word meaning river of death, a prophetic des- des- destination designation for what could become one of the war's most haunted sites. Chickamauga was fought in dense woodland that broke formations and turned the battle into hundreds of individual firefights. Soldiers often couldn't see more than 50 feet in any direction. Units became separated, lost, and sometimes fired on their own men by mistake. The confusion was so complete that entire brigades simply vanished into the woods. The casualty figures tell the story. 34,000 total casualties over 2 days, with some regiments suffering 60% losses. The 21st Ohio Infantry went into battle with 535 men and came out with 89. Bodies lay so thick in some areas that walking required stepping over the dead. According to local folklore tradition, Chickamauga ghost stories began during the battle itself. Soldiers from both armies reported seeing figures in uniforms moving through the woods, figures that disappeared when approached. Some assumed they were enemy scouts. Others believed they were spirits of men who had died in earlier fighting. Local legend tells of Union Colonel James Bradley, who, according to folklore, found himself separated from his regiment on the second day of battle. Lost in the dense forest with only a handful of men, he encountered something that would haunt his memories forever. According to the folklore tradition, Bradley saw them through the trees. Confederate soldiers in gray, marching in perfect formation through the woodlands. But something was wrong with their movement. They made no sound as they passed through thick underbrush that should have rustled and snapped. Their feet left no tracks in the soft forest floor. Legend recounts that Bradley ordered his men to take cover, expecting an attack. But the gray columns passed by them without acknowledging their presence, moving deeper into the woods like men with a designation only they could see. Destination only they could see. Only when they had vanished completely did Bradley realize that many of the soldiers had been missing arms, legs, and heads. Modern Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park preserves much of the original battlefield, including the dense woods where so much of the fighting occurred. Park rangers and visitors regularly report encounters with Civil War soldiers moving through the trees, always heading towards some unseen objective. According to local folklore, the most common sighting involves what witnesses describe as a phantom brigade. Hundreds of Confederate soldiers marching in formation through areas where no roads exist. They move in perfect order, despite the thick underbrush, maintaining rank and formation as if they're still under military discipline. Legend tells of park interpreter Robert Hayes conducting a sunrise tour in 1992 when his group encountered the Phantom Brigade crossing their paths. According to the folklore, the ghostly soldiers appeared solid and real, their uniforms clean and equipment in perfect order. They carried battle flags that snapped in a wind no living person could feel. According to the folklore traditions, the phantom soldiers took no notice of the modern visitors, maintaining their march with steady determination of men following orders issued 130 years ago. The entire brigade, perhaps 3,000 men, took nearly 10 minutes to pass, after which the woods fell silent again. What makes Chickamauga haunting particularly compelling is their connection to the battles, confusion, and chaos. Many of the phantom soldiers appear to be lost, searching for their units, or trying to carry out orders they received before death claimed them. This reflects the psychological reality of Chickamauga, a battle where traditional military order broke down completely. Units became scattered, commanders lost contact with their men, and soldiers died without anyone knowing where they had gone or what they had been trying to accomplish. The ghost stories serve as a supernatural expression of their unfinished business, spirits still trying to complete missions interrupted by death, still searching for comrades they'll never find. We next travel to Tennessee in the Battle of Shiloh, where on April 6th and 7th, 1862, over 100,000 soldiers fought in what was the largest battle in American history. Shiloh shocked the nation with its casualty toll: 23,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, and introduced Americans to the industrial scale slaughter that would define the Civil War. The battle's aftermath was horrific as the fighting itself. Wounded soldiers laying scattered across miles of battlefield, crying for help that was slow to come. The small town of Pittsburgh Landing, was transformed into a massive hospital with wounded men lying on every available surface in houses, churches, barns, and simply on the ground. Many of the wounded never made it to proper medical care. They died alone in the woods, calling for water, for their mothers, for God to end their suffering. Others survived the journey to field hospitals only to die from infections, amputations performed without anesthesia, or simply from shock and blood loss. According to local folklore traditions, supernatural activity at Shiloh began almost immediately after the battle. Residents of Pittsburgh Landing reported hearing wounded soldiers calling for help from buildings that had been cleared of patients. The sounds were always the same: cries for water, calls for specific names, and prayers whispered in the darkness. Local legend tells of nurse Clara Edmonds, who, according to folklore, had worked tirelessly to care for the wounded during the battle's aftermath. According to tradition, weeks after the last patients had been moved to permanent hospitals, Edmonds returned to one of the makeshift hospital buildings to retrieve medical supplies. According to local legend, as she entered the empty building, she heard something that made her freeze. The familiar sound of a hospital in operation, groans of pain, whispered requests for water, doctors calling for instruments, the rustle of bloody bandages being changed. Local legend recounts that Edmonds moved through the building, following the sounds. In every room, she could see them, wounded soldiers laying on makeshift beds, their bodies bearing the terrible wounds of Shiloh. Some reached towards her with pleading eyes. Others simply stared at the ceiling. They would never see clearly again. According to tradition, the Phantom Hospital operated exactly as it had during the battle. Nurses moving between patients, doctors performing amputations with the ghost instruments, orderlies carrying stretchers loaded with men who had died 150 years ago. Modern Shiloh's National Military Park encompasses much of the original battlefield, including areas where field hospitals operated during and after the battle. Visitors and park staff, regularly report supernatural encounters related to medical care, the sounds of surgery, cries for help, and the sight of figures in period medical attire moving through areas that are now empty fields. According to local folklore, the most persistent haunting occurs near the site of the Shiloh Church, which served as a major field hospital. Visitors report hearing surgical procedures being performed, the sound of bone saws, screams of patients undergoing amputations without anesthesia, and the quiet prayers of chaplains administering last rites. Local legend tells of battlefield photographer Michael Torres, who, according to folklore, was documenting the park at sunrise in 1995 when he encountered something beyond his camera's ability to capture. According to local tradition, as he approached the church site, he heard the unmistakable sounds of Civil War era medical procedures. According to folklore, when Torres investigated, he found the area filled with phantom medical personnel treating wounded soldiers from both armies. Union and Confederate surgeons worked side by side, their medical oaths transcending the political divisions that had brought these patients to this place. The ghostly medical team took no notice of Torres, according to legend, continuing their internal mission to save lives that they had been lost 133 years earlier. Only when the sun rose fully above the horizon did the Phantom Hospital fade away, leaving Torres alone with the morning mist. Our journey takes us to Virginia and the Battle of Brandy Station, site of the largest cavalry engagement of the Civil War. On June 9th, 1863, over 20,000 mounted soldiers clashed in a swirling battle that raged across miles of rolling countryside. The fighting was particularly brutal because cavalry combat was intensely personal. Saber against saber, pistols at point blank range, horses and riders falling together. The Battle of Brandy Station marked a turning point in the war's cavalry operations. Union horsemen, long considered inferior to their Confederate counterparts, proved that they could fight on equal terms. But the cost was enormous. Hundreds of the finest horsemen from both armies lay dead in the Virginia fields, their mounts often dying beside them. The afternoon, the aftermath of cavalry battles was particularly haunting. Unlike infantry engagements where the dead lay in neat lines, cavalry fights scattered bodies across miles of countryside. Wounded horses screamed in agony until put out of their misery. The bond between horse and rider, often stronger than brotherhood, was severed by bullets and steel. According to local folklore tradition, the supernatural activity at Brandy Station involved mounted soldiers from both armies continuing their eternal fight. Residents and visitors report seeing cavalry charges materializing out of the morning mist, complete with battle cries, clashing sabers, and the thunder of thousands of hooves. Legend tells of farmer William Harrison, whose family had owned land at Brady Station for generations. According to folklore, in September 1863, just months after the battle, Harrison was checking his fields when he witnessed something that defied explanation. According to local tradition, Harrison saw what them coming across this pasture. Confederate cavalry in gray, riding at full gallop with sabers raised. Behind them, Union cavalry in blue gave chase, their own weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun. The ghostly charge moved with the fluid grace of mounted warfare, horses and riders moving at one. Local legend recounts that Harrison would hear everything: the thunder of hooves, the jingle of equipment, the battle cries of men who had died months earlier. The phantom cavalry swept past him, too close, so close he could see the determination on their spectral faces, the foam on their ghostly horses' bits. According to folklore legend, the charge continued across Harrison's fields and into the woods beyond, the sound gradually fading until only silence remained. When Harrison investigated, he found no tracks, no disturbed ground, nothing to indicate that hundreds of mounted soldiers had just passed through his property. Modern Brandy Station is largely in private hands, but portions of the battlefield are preserved and open to visitors. The ghost stories continue, always involved mounted soldiers engaged in the swift, deadly dance of cavalry warfare. According to the local folklore, the most spectacular sighting occurred on June 9th, the anniversary of the battle. Witnesses report seeing entire cavalry regiments materializing out of the dawn mist, charging across the field that had been farmland for over a century and a half. Local legend tells of Civil War enthusiast Patricia Williams, who, according to folklore, was visiting the battlefield in 2003 when she encountered the Phantom Cavalry. According to local traditions, Williams was standing near a historical marker when she heard the distant sound of hooves approaching at speed. According to folklore, Williams turned to see the sight that took her breath away. Union cavalry cresting a hill at full gallop, their sabers catching the moonlight. They rode with a confident skill of men born to the saddle, their mounts responsive to every command, despite having been dead for 140 years. The ghost horsemen swept past Williams with military precision. According to legend, their formation, perfect despite the uneven ground. He could see individual faces, young men mostly, their eyes bright with the thrill of cavalry action. Then they disappeared into a patch of woods, leaving only the scent of horse sweat and gunpowder hanging in the still air. We conclude our battlefield tour in Mississippi at Vicksburg, where from May to June 1863, Union forces conducted one of the Civil War's most grueling sieges. For 47 days, Confederate defenders and civilian residents were trapped in the city, while Union artillery pounded their position around the clock. The siege of Vicksburg was warfare of a different character, not the sudden shock of battle, but the slow grinding of starvation, disease, and constant bombardment. Civilians dug caves in hillsides to escape the shells. Soldiers and residents alike were reduced to eating rats, cats, and leather to survive. When the city finally surrendered on July 4th, 1863, it marked the effective end of the Confederate control of the Mississippi River. But the psychological scars ran deeper than the physical damage. The siege had broken spirits as well as walls, creating trauma that would persist for generations. According to local folklore tradition, Vicksburg's hauntings are different from other battlefields. They involve the civilian population as much as the soldiers. The supernatural activity focused on the cave systems where families lived during the siege, creating a unique form of domestic Civil War hauntings. Local legends tell of the phantom residents who still inhabited Vicksburg's caves. According to folklore, visitors regularly report encountering Confederate families, men, women, and children, huddled in underground shelters, waiting for a bombardment to end that ceased 160 years ago. According to local tradition, park ranger David Martinez was conducting an underground tour in 1998 when his group encountered something beyond their historical imaginations. Local legend recounts that they moved through one of the restored cave systems. They heard a sound that shouldn't exist: children crying, women whispering prayers, men discussing how long their food supplies might last. According to folklore, when Martinez investigated the sound, he found the cave filled with Confederate civilians from the siege period. Entire families sat in the dim underground light, their faces gaunt from starvation, but their spirits unbroken. Children played quiet games to pass the time. Adults shared meager rations with the careful precision of people who had learned to make nothing last forever. The phantom residents took no notice of the modern visitors, according to legend, continuing to live through their eternal siege. Only when Martinez's group moved to another section of the cave system did the sound fade away. But Vicksburg's military ghosts are equally persistent. The siege lines, where Union and Confederate soldiers faced each other across deadly ground for weeks, are said to be haunted by soldiers still manning their positions. According to the local folklore tradition, the most common sightings involve Confederate defenders maintaining their watch from trenches and earthworks. These phantom soldiers appeared during the evening hours, checking their weapons, scanning the approaches for the Union's attack that ended in 1863. Local legend tells of Civil War archaeologist James Patterson, who, according to folklore, was a surviving Confederate fortification in, in 2001 when he encountered the Eternal Garrison. According to the local tradition, Peterson was using a metal detector to locate artifacts when he realized he was not alone on the battlefield. According to folklore, Confederate soldiers in Butternut Gray occupied every defensive position, exactly as they'd done during the siege. Some cleaned their muskets with the careful attention of men who knew their lives depended on their weapons. Others kept watch through the growing darkness, alert for any sign of Union movement. The Phantom Defenders maintained their vigil throughout the night, according to legend, changing guard shifts with military precision. Only when the only with the dawn did they fade away, leaving Peterson alone among the earthworks, where they had given everything for a cause that was already lost. As our journey through the Civil War battlefields concludes, we must examine what these supernatural narratives reveal about America's relationship with its greatest trauma. Why do Civil War ghost stories differ so remarkably from Revolutionary hauntings? What did they tell us about how Americans process the memory of Civil War? The answer lies in the fundamental difference between the conflicts themselves. The Revolutionary War was fought against a foreign power for national independence, a clear moral cause that produced heroic ghosts standing eternal watch. The Civil War was Americans killing Americans over the future of America's democracy, a moral complexity that produced very different supernatural folklore. Civil War ghosts aren't heroes or guardians. They're trapped souls, caught between life and death by the suddenness and brutality of their ends. They continue fighting battles that ended 160 years ago, not because they chose to, but because they don't know how to stop. This reflects the psychological reality of the Civil War itself. Unlike foreign conflicts, where enemy dead can be forgotten, Civil War leaves Americans sharing the same soil as the graves of the people they killed. The battlefield ghosts of Gettysburg, Antietam, and Chickamauga represent a collective national trauma that's never been fully healed. The persistence of these stories across generations suggests that Americans continue to grapple with fundamental questions about the Civil War's meaning. Was was the enormous cost of human life justified by the preservation of the Union and the ending of slavery? Could the same goals have been achieved without such bloodshed? Are we worthy of the sacrifices made in our name? Civil War ghost stories also democratize the memory of the conflict in ways that official history often fails to do. Academic Civil War history tends to focus on generals and grand strategy, political causes, and economic factors. Those stories remind us that the war's real cost was measured by in individual human lives. Soldiers who died calling for their mothers, civilians who starved in siege caves, young men who bled to death in cornfields they had never seen before. Perhaps most importantly, these supernatural narratives preserve the emotional truth of the Civil War combat in ways that casualty statistics cannot. They remind us that behind every number was a person, someone's son or husband or father who left home, believing in a cause worth dying for. The phantom soldiers marching through morning mists at Gettysburg, the wounded calling for help in Shiloh, ghostly hospitals, the cavalry charges that continue across Virginia fields. They're all manifestations of America's ongoing conversation with its most traumatic chapter. They remind us that the Civil War wasn't just a historical event that ended in 1865, but an ongoing process of national healing that continues to this day. The questions that drove Americans to kill each other about equality, about federal versus state power, about what it means to be American remain relevant in contemporary political discourse. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, Civil War supernatural folklore deserves recognition as a vital part of America's cultural memory. These stories preserve collective trauma, moral complexity, and human costs in a way that might otherwise be lost to abstract historical analysis. The blue and the gray spirits who still walk America's battlefields serve as a reminder that some wounds run too deep to heal completely, that some conflicts leave scars that persist across generations. They embody our ongoing struggle to understand how a nation dedicated to liberty and justice could have torn itself apart so completely. In the end, Civil War ghosts may be the most honest supernatural folklore in American culture. They do not offer easy answers or comfort patriotic myths. Instead, they force us to confront the brutal reality of what Americans are capable of doing to each other when fundamental principles are at stake. The Civil War may have ended in 1865, but its ghosts walk among us still in the political divisions that echo the 19th century's sectional conflicts, in the ongoing struggles for racial equality, in the tension between federal authority and state rights. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps we need these supernatural reminders of the price of division, these ghostly witnesses, the cost of civil war. As long as Americans remember Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, Vicksburg, the spirits of the Civil War will continue their eternal watch, not as heroes or villains, but as witnesses to the worst and best of what America can be. Thank you for joining me on this journey through America's most haunted battlefield. Until then, remember, the past is never truly past. It lives on in the stories that we tell, the places we preserve, the spirits, real or imagined, that continue to shape our understanding of what we are as Americans. I'm Jeremy. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep listening for the echoes of the past. Good night.